Well, thank you, everyone, for coming and listening. I know I'm between you and some drinks later on, I'm sure, after the event, and so I appreciate you guys staying late to hear me. Again, my name is Reggie. I'm the founder and CEO of Cvent, and the reason I showed this video was because a lot of people in the UK have more recently heard of Cvent. We opened up an office here last year, and what I thought I would do is talk about a little bit about our story. And a lot of people know this part of our story simply because that's what Cvent's face is now. What a lot of people don't know is the struggles that we had in growing our business and starting our company. We come from very humble beginning, like many of the entrepreneurs here today. To create innovation is not easy, and I wanted to share with you kind of the lessons that I've learned over the last 15 years in growing a business. So I thought I'd first tell you a little bit about my biases and what the lens that I look at or where I come from. So I grew up in the United States. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and after I graduated from college, I remember talking to my parents, and I told them that I wanted to be a lawyer, which didn't go down well, because as an Indian, they kind of gave me two choices. You had to be an engineer or a doctor. And so I said, listen, I really want to be a lawyer. And so they couldn't really say much, so I became a lawyer. And after I graduated from law school, I practiced law for 5 years. And I enjoyed being a lawyer, but that really wasn't my passion. And so what I did to kind of take my energy and my passion is I started an organization. And the organization was a CEO organization called the Indian CEO Technology Council. And what it was to get CEOs of technology companies in the Washington area who had 10 million in revenue and 75 employees. It was kind of an executive organization. Now, I was an associate at the law firm, so I didn't even belong to the own group that I started. So I kind of put a velvet rope, and I got on this side of it, and then I started not letting anyone else in unless they met that criteria. And so that organization, though, started to grow. We grew to about 250 members, and what I realized as a good marketer is that we had almost 100% penetration. We had almost every CEO or Indian in Washington belong. So what I decided to do is to open up to anyone. So we decided to let in white people. No, I'm just joking. But we let in anyone. We didn't care if you're purple, green, blue, didn't matter. As long as you had 10 million in revenue, you could join. So our group grew from 250 people to 2,500 people, and we became the largest CEO group in the East Coast of the US. And so, but during that time period, I was organizing the events. I was the secretary, I was the executive director, and I was the president of that nonprofit that I started. And it was very painful. I was basically using Excel, Outlook, yellow sticky notes, and Scotch tape to kind of organize events. And so I knew that there was a pain point. So the first thing I learned in starting a business, the first thing is you need to actually find a pain point. And once you find that pain point, the critical thing is not to create a vitamin. Not to create a vitamin. I mentor a lot of entrepreneurs, and the reality is most entrepreneurs create vitamins. What's a vitamin? A vitamin is a nice to have. Okay, a nice to have. So let me give an example. Imagine I live on the fourth story of an apartment building. I walk down the stairs because the elevator's broken. I walk half a block away, and I realize I forgot my vitamin. How many of you would turn around, go back up the stairs to get your vitamin? You would say, no, I'll do without it. I'll get it tomorrow. But imagine the same thing happened, and you walk down 4 flights of stairs, you walk 2 blocks away, and you have a headache. And the fact is you're allergic, so you have to have a special pill that will take your headache away. Nothing else matters. That pain is all that matters. And so you'll go back, walk 2 blocks, up the 4 stories, and get that aspirin. So the point is, as an entrepreneur, what I quickly learned is the best way to create a business is to find a pain point and create an aspirin. And that's what I did. I was running these events. I was getting hundreds of people. I was throwing 30 or 40 of them. And this is back in 1999, and I decided that I'm going to create the aspirin. And that was the advent of Cvent, how I first started it. So after I found that, the next thing I did, oops, let me see my slide here, is I had to start the business. So luckily I'd saved a lot of money working as a lawyer, and I put it all into the company. And then the other thing that I did, and now longer you can't do this anymore because credit cards and computers are so fast, but in 1999, the computers are very slow, so what I did is I used to get all these applications for credit cards. I'm sure over here you get things mailed all the time to apply for a credit card. I had pretty good credit back then, so I applied to 15 different credit cards within 30 minutes, and I got approved for $400,000 worth of credit cards. And before the credit card companies could figure out what happened, I had bought all kinds of equipment, because back then you had to buy servers. There wasn't really the cloud. You had to buy the servers. It was much more expensive in the hardware. So I quickly got $400,000 at a 19% interest. I thought I was really smart till the bills started coming in and there was no revenue. But the point is that I funded the company by first saving money. The second thing is I used credit cards to do it, and then some of the other founders of the company who joined also put some money in. But we were basically a bootstrapped company, and we were basically working out of my parents' basement in the beginning. And so we funded the company, and we were growing very slowly. But then something happened. And then what happened was we were in the middle of the dot-com boom, the gold rush in 1999. And so all of a sudden, $1 billion of venture capital, $1 billion of venture capital went into our space. What was our space? Online event registration. So we quickly had to also respond to that and grow, because all of a sudden we were about half a dozen people. And again, this is in early 2000, about 6 months later. And we realized we had to grow really quickly. So we decided to raise money, and we raised money very quickly from that organization I started, that Indian COI Tech Council. And people who were friends of mine and who I built through my network, they invested, and we raised $17 million. So we quickly grew from 6 employees to 125 employees. We did that all within about 10 months. So really rapid growth. But then what happened is the perfect storm hit. September 11th, the recession and reality hit. We had blown through $16.6 million of our $17 million, and we had built a big, fat $1.5 million revenue company. We were on the brink of bankruptcy because we were burning $500,000 a month. So we did what we had to do, which is we quickly cut 80% of our staff, and we went from 125 employees down to about 24 employees. It was an extraordinarily difficult time. Now, like I said, in the early days, things were going great. We got a lot of great coverage. We were growing fast. Got a lot of different newspapers covering us and talking about our story. But during this perfect storm, it really started to test an entrepreneur. And when you're testing an entrepreneur, there are a lot of lessons there. So I wanted to share with you a few vignettes of how difficult it was. So I remember, and again, from the US, we have something called high school reunions. I know they don't do this as much in the UK, but I went to a high school in Washington, and there were about 400 people in my graduating senior class. Now, I was very excited to go to my high school reunion. It was I'm aging myself here, but it was my 15-year high school reunion. I graduated in 1987, and this is 2002. And I remember going to my high school reunion, and again, I used to be the student body president of my high school, so normally when you go to your reunion, you're really excited. But what I realized was I was the biggest loser in my high school. And I'll tell you why I was the biggest loser. Number one, I still lived at home with my parents. I was 32 years old, and it's not easy living with your parents. I was kind of from the show Gavin and Stacey. I was kind of I'm trying to remember this, the Smithy from Gavin and Stacey. I was going to use my Seinfeld joke and George Costanza, but my team said no one knows who that is. But anyways, so I was the Smithy, living at home with my parents. And it was, it's tough. It's tough enough for me to date already, much less when I meet a woman and then say, well, we can't go back to my place because I have older roommates. But anyways, that's a different story. I won't bore you with that. But the point is that I was living at home with my parents. I owed everyone in town money. I had 115 investors. These were all friends of mine, my network, and they're all after trying to get to me because they knew that I had lost all their money, $17 million worth. But the worst thing is the papers turned on me. Every article was negative about Cvent. So the Washington Post, which is considered the third or fourth largest publication in the United States, they wrote 3 or 4 articles on Cvent talking about how we're not going to survive. Why'd they do that? Because we had 15 or 20 positive articles during the boom. So what you take on the positive, you're going to take on the negative. But the point is, when I went to my reunion, I felt like the biggest loser because I don't know anyone else who lived at home, who owed everyone in town money. I hadn't taken a salary in 2.5 years, and I had no money. And the papers were saying that basically Cvent's going to fail. That's a tough thing to face. It's tough to go through personal tragedy. It's even tougher to go through it when the papers are talking about your personal tragedy. So this is the kind of stuff that you have to go through as an executive when you're running a startup sometimes because you go through tough times. So I remember back in 2002, we were this close from bankruptcy. We cut 80% of our staff, and we're left with just a few people. And I remember that there was one last thing that we had to do, and it was called rent. So in the US, the way it works is we were 125 people. We moved in the dot-com boom, so there was no space left literally in all of Washington because every company was growing. We happened to pick the peak time, so when we moved, we got space for 250 people because we thought we were going to grow and there was no space, so we're going to take it when we finally got it. So when we cut down to 24 people, imagine being in a place like this and having a meeting with 12 of you. That's what it felt like. But I couldn't get out of the lease because in the US, your leases are 5 years. 5-year leases, that's the way it works in the US. So we had signed a 5-year lease. Our rent was $900,000 a year. So we had $4.5 million of payments. We were only a month like 7. And if you miss 1 month's rent, 1 month, they accelerate all the rest of the payments. So we'd owe like $4 million the next month. That's the penalty. That's just the way it works there. So you never miss your month rent. We were going to miss our next month's rent. So I went to the landlord and I said, listen, things are getting tough and we're about to go bankrupt. I'm not bluffing you. We're down to 24 people. Our rent is $900,000 and our revenue is $1.5 million. It doesn't work. Half your building is empty now because everyone's folded. All the dot companies went away. And at least we can take some smaller space and have a chance to survive and I can pay you rent. And then he said to me, listen, Reggie, we normally don't do this, but I'm going to let you do this, but you have to do one thing. And what that one thing is that you have to personally sign the lease. The way it works in the US is if your company goes bankrupt, they can't go after you personally. Everything's behind the corporate shell is what they call it. But he made me sign it personally so they can go after me personally. Now, why was that a big deal? I didn't think it was. I had no money. I had no assets. I lived with my parents. I literally had the same suits that I had in law school, the car I had from law school. So I said, I had no assets. What do I care? But then I thought about it and I said, I realized that if the company went bankrupt and they sued me, I would go bankrupt and I couldn't go back to being a lawyer. And I practiced law and went to law school. I spent 9 years focusing on that career. And that's when things really get stacked up to try an entrepreneur. I like to say it's when you separate the wheat from the chaff. The wheat from the chaff. Why? Because now I had no plan B. I would be 32 years old, no training. I certainly wasn't a good entrepreneur. I couldn't really go back to practicing law because no good law firm would hire me with bankruptcy on my background. And I would have no options. So this is when you really try an entrepreneur. So I went to my team and I said, listen, I'm going to sign this $5 million lease on my personal, it went down to about $2 million. I'm going to sign this $2 million lease, but I need to make sure you're with me. Are you going to stick by me and stick by the company because I want to make this work and I'm going to sign this? My team gathered. They all agreed that they were in for this, and off we went. So the point is when you're guaranteeing the success of a company and writing, it's a lot to do. But my lesson number 2 is not everyone should be an entrepreneur. The fact is 99% of the people in this room, or 95%, should be entrepreneurs. They're not willing to live at home for 7 years. They're not willing to not take a salary for 3 years. They're not willing to put what it takes to build a business. You don't build a business in 1 or 2 or 3 years. We're in year 15. Our equity was not worth anything to year 8. 8 years is when finally our stock was worth something to anyone who held it. That's the kind of stuff you don't read in the papers. You read about LinkedIn, about Google. But the fact is most companies are built over a decade, 15, 20 years. And the fact is that you have to be patient. And you really have to be in it for more than just money. Because generally there isn't money at the end of the rainbow if that's what you're in it for. And so my lesson number 2 is being an entrepreneur isn't for everyone, but you can be what we call an intrapreneur. Now, what's an intrapreneur? An intrapreneur is an entrepreneur within a company. So we look for entrepreneurs when we hire. We look for people who are self-starters, who want to be entrepreneurs, but don't want to live at home with their parents or put everything they own into the business to take that risk. And so what I would recommend, whether you're an owner of a company, to look for entrepreneurs, because they're the ones who grow your business. We couldn't grow to what we were if we didn't have a lot of entrepreneurs who end up becoming basically CEOs of divisions, of different business, different products. And if you're within a company, here's what I'll tell you. If you have a good executive team, it is so easy to figure out who the entrepreneurs are. So easy. I'm going to give you an analogy. And don't take this the wrong way, but I'm just making this as an analogy. Imagine I put you in a room for 1 hour with 5 kids who are 10 years old. Maybe 2 hours. In 2 hours, you can kind of figure out some of their personalities. You can figure out who's the one that's a slacker, who's the one that's probably going to drop out of school, who's the kid that's going to be the punk, who's the person that's a studious person, who's the one that doesn't have a lot of confidence but has a lot of resilience underneath, you could tell. The fact is, when you see hundreds of employees, you can pick out your entrepreneurs or your intrapreneurs within that. So what I recommend, if you're in the audience and you're working at a company, if you step up to be an entrepreneur, if you have a good executive team, they'll recognize that and you'll move quickly. Lesson number 3, fall down 7 times, get up 8 times. You're going to keep getting knocked down. If you're an entrepreneur or on the executive team, which many of you are, that's absolutely going to happen. But you got to keep getting up. Most people get knocked down 2 or 3 times, they're out for the count. That's why they shouldn't be entrepreneurs. You're going to be knocked down 7, 8 times. I remember with us, we kept on getting knocked down. We cut 80% of our staff. We're close to bankruptcy. And after 2002, we started to finally stabilize. From 2002 to 2004, we were the walking dead. We just stayed at 25 people, basically. 25, 26, 27. And the fact is, we just wanted to keep the lights on. But the fact is that we kept on getting knocked down. I remember there was one very negative article by the Washington Post. Again, it was the biggest paper certainly in Washington and one of the largest in the U.S. And it said that Cvent's going to fail. And our competitors took that article. And every time we're about to close a contract with a client, the competitor would send that article from the Washington Post, a very legitimate company, and say that Cvent's going to fail. And every time we're about there, we get knocked down again. But that's what you have to go through. And you have to just keep being persistent. Lesson number 4 is, this is probably the most important lesson, persistency and consistency. That's the number 1 hallmark of an entrepreneur or an entrepreneurial executive team. Here's what I will tell you, is that if someone asks me to describe what it's like to be an entrepreneur, there's just 4 words, or 3 words. It's a grind. It's a grind. That's what being an entrepreneur is. What do I mean by that? You have 2 rocks, and you start making them, you start rubbing the rocks together. Little crumbs fall out. You're doing this for months and months and months. Nothing happens. Then some more crumbles come down. And then after a couple years, a chip falls. You're getting excited because you're starting to see some movement. Then nothing happens again. You keep doing it, more grain comes out, and then finally, over time, you will wear them down. But it's a grind. That's what it means to be an entrepreneur. But being an entrepreneur is also a very noble cause. You're creating jobs. You're changing the world, hopefully. But the fact is, you have to be persistent and consistent. And if you're not ready to be persistent and consistent, again, being an entrepreneur isn't necessarily for everyone. But that's okay. You can, again, be an intrapreneur within a company. And with an intrapreneur, it can be the same thing. What I notice with most people, we have 1,500 employees around the world. Had a lot of people work for us over the last 15 years. Number 1 thing I see is people jump jobs. They don't stick around. Nothing really happens in a year or 2. I can tell you, anyone who worked at Cvent for a year or 2, I don't even know their name. Because they didn't make an impact when you look at a 15, 20, 30-year view. The fact is, it takes time to make an impact. And so what I see most young people do is they jump jobs very quickly. What I recommend is put time into finding the right job and stick with it, be persistent and consistent, because hopefully, over time, you'll make that impact and continue to grow. Lesson number 5, the DNA of your company is your people. The most important part of your company, we're in the knowledge economy, is the people. And I can tell you that at Cvent, we invest heavily in people. The first 1,000 employees, I probably interviewed 85% of them. I would spend probably 65% of my time investing in the DNA of our people, which is hiring and recruiting and retaining our people. Why? Customers are important. Products important. Doesn't really matter if you don't have good people. Here is our view. The meetings industry is a huge industry. $565 billion a year is spent on meetings and events worldwide. That $500 billion will be automated over time. It used to be fax and snail mail. Now it's email and online registration. You can see the evolution, but it will be automated. Our view was that we have a big space. Now I have to hire the right people, passionate, bright people, and they'll figure out how to monetize it and grow a great company. That's why I spend so much time with recruiting. I would go down, for example, at the universities we recruit to. Until about a year and a half ago, I personally went to every university myself to recruit because I wanted to hire that right DNA from the millennial generation. Because you probably heard this saying before, A players hire A players. B players hire C players. C players hire F players. If you start putting the bar down as your organization grows, your whole organization starts building on mediocrity. What the best thing to do is invest in your people. Now, Jack Welch, the former CEO of GE, used to have a saying. He said that a CEO can focus on one of three things. They can focus on strategy, they can focus on customers, or they can focus on people. And you can't do all three of them. Again, I personally have chosen people because I think the rest will be done with your people to figure out the strategy and to make sure you build good product and to make sure you retain your customers. But everything's about people. Now, during the darkest times at Cvent, when we were almost bankrupt and we cut 80% of our staff and we're in a space like this and we have 20 people there and every time they bring a customer in, it's just paying the air conditioning bill. A lot of negativity in the company. We had promised a big company and then we see something that obviously is not. None of us knew if we were going to survive. And this is the video that we would show our people that kind of helped them inspire them to hang on. So for all the entrepreneurs out there and those of you who are entrepreneurs or part of the team, this is the video that we would show our people, and we show it to all our employees still to today about why we're in an entrepreneurial company and why we're part of innovation. So I'm going to have a question for you. What do you guys think is the number one leadership competency of the future? When you hire people because your goal is to grow your business and scale it, what do you think the number one competency of the leadership competency of the future? There was a study done by IBM. They interviewed 1,500 CEOs across the world and asked them this question. And I was surprised at the answer. I didn't even guess it. What do you guys think it is? Just anyone want to take a guess what the number one leadership competency of the future is? Anyone want to try? Anyone? Okay. I'm sorry? Creative. Boy, you hit it right on the spot. That's actually the number one. Creativity is the number one leadership competency of the future. And I was a little surprised when that came up because I would have probably thought of something different. And the reason it's so important is kind of obvious to all of us. Look at all the companies that haven't created an innovative culture and what's happened to them. Kodak, $35 billion company, is gone. AOL, merged with Time Warner, the biggest merger and acquisition, at least in the history of the U.S., $140 billion. AOL is now worth $1.5 billion. The point is that you can pick all kinds of companies that didn't keep on the innovation curve, and then they're either bankrupt or they're pretty much not really on the curve anymore. So the point is to hire people that have creativity and innovation. And that's one of the number one attributes you can ask and look for. So the question is, when you interview people, I bet many of you don't even ask a question geared towards creativity. And one of the questions we ask when we interview people is, can you name one thing you did at your old job that was creative, that was innovative? 80 to 90% of the candidates can't think of one because they just do their job. And that's okay, because a lot of them, because the culture isn't created to be innovative. But the fact is, there's just simple questions like that when you interview candidates. The point is to create that culture, but you also have to hire that DNA of creating that culture of creativity. Now, we do it one way, which is by frankly hiring a lot of people in the millennial generation. Every year we hire about 100 people that are either kind of 0 to 2 years out of universities. So they tend to be much more fluent in the digital technology and the digital economy. But the fact is, creativity is very important. Lesson number 7, get back to the basics. Once we cut 80% of our staff and we were down to 24 people, we were forced to figure out how to build our business with a lot less resources. So we focused on 3 things: hire the best people, build the best products, and service your customers. That's simple. Don't get fancy, just focus on the basics. That culture is still, and that philosophy is still what's guided Cvent to where we are today. Hire the best people, build the best products, service your customers. That's it. There's nothing else that really matters besides those 3 things. And that's how we continue to run our business. So during that time is when our culture was built, of when we finally had a chance to just look and see what we need to do. Lesson number 8, do not diversify too fast, but once you do get to a certain size, then you decide to build multiple engines. So there was one of my close mentors that told me something. They said this to me. They said, Reggie, don't go international, don't go into other products until you hit almost 100 million. That was what they told us. And let me give you what we did. We stuck with one particular area: online event registration, domestic, we did it all in the US, and the mid-sized market. That's all we did for 8.5 years. Why? Because we wanted to be the best in that and be the market leader before we went on to the next thing. Too many companies try to do too many things too fast. They try to go global too fast. They try to develop too many products too fast, instead of being focused on 1 or 2 things and being the best at it. Learn that, scale it, and then repeat. That's what we learned, and I think that's really what helped us to get that foundation the first 8 years. Now we have a platform with 6 or 7 products. One of our products, for example, we launched in 2008. It's called our Cvent Supplier Network. What is that? It's simply a marketplace where we connect meeting planners with venues. We have about 200,000 venues, and we have tens of thousands of meeting planners looking for venues. When we launched the tool in 2008, we had $50 million of RFP traffic go through our system. In 2015, I was just on my earnings call last week, and we announced that we're projecting $10 billion to go through the system in 2015, up from $6.5 billion last year. The point is why are we able to grow so rapidly? Because we spent 8 years building a foundation. Once you build a foundation, then you can grow much more rapidly. So one of my big recommendations to entrepreneurs: pick a few areas, be really good at it, master it, then scale and go into other areas. Lesson number 9, what's the secret sauce of growing a company? Is we don't forget where we came from. We're still very humble. We act like a startup. We always know there's 2 guys or 2 gals in a garage that have a big X on Cvent's back. And the fact is, you have to have a healthy respect for your competition and never forget where you came from. So I'll tell you some policies at Cvent just to give you a sense. So when we travel, we always travel economy. I fly to India every year, and I travel economy. When we not just me, but everyone in the company. When we go to trade shows, we're 2 per room, including me. There's a couple colleagues here, Lewis Ford, and I've shared rooms for 5 or 6 times. He was an associate. We still do that today. Why? Because we don't forget where we came from. Frugality is important because I'd rather spend money on software, on building software and servicing our customers. The point is don't forget where you came from. And I think that secret sauce is what's really kept us growing till today. But the biggest thing is build an entrepreneur culture. If you want to scale a business, we're valued at more than $1 billion today. And how do we do that? It wasn't because of me. It was because of the team we built. The reason we survived that most difficult period is because of my management team. They stuck by not only me and the company, because 9 of the 10 of my original management team from 2000 and 99 are still with me. But what they did is they built a culture of other entrepreneurs, and we let them be entrepreneurs. And building that culture is key. So what we have a saying at Cvent is find quality people, tell them what you want, and get out of the way. Now, lesson number 10, let's embrace the future of technology. And I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about that.
Everything is amazing right now, and nobody's happy. Like, in my lifetime, the changes in the world have been incredible. When I was a kid, we had a rotary phone. We had a phone that you had to stand next to, and you had to dial it.
Yes.
You realize how primitive? You're making sparks in a phone, and you actually would hate people with zeros in their numbers because it was more like, oh, this guy's got 2 zeros. Screw that guy. Why do I want to? Yeah. And then if they called and you weren't home, the phone would just ring lonely by itself. And then if you wanted money, you had to go in the bank for when it was open for like 3 hours. You had to stand in line, write yourself a check like an idiot. And then when you ran out of money, you just go, well, I can't do any more things now.
Right.
I can't do any more things.
That's it, yeah.
That was it. And even if you had a credit card, the guy would go, ugh, and he'd bring out this whole shunk, and he'd write, you'd have to call the president to see if you have any money. And
it's all true, kids. You had to call the president, It was ridiculous.
Yes.
Do you feel that we now, in the 21st century, we take technology for granted?
Well, yeah, because now we live in an amazing, amazing world, and it's wasted on the crappiest generation of just spoiled idiots that don't care, because this is what people are like now. They got their phone, and they're like, it won't. Give it a second. It's going to space. Can you give it a second to get back from space? Is the speed of light too slow for you? Yeah. I was on an airplane, and there was internet, high-speed internet on the airplane. That's the newest thing that I know exists. And I'm sitting on the plane, and they go, open up your laptop, you can go on the internet. And it's fast, and I'm watching YouTube clips. I'm in an airplane. And then it breaks down, and they apologize, the internet's not working. The guy next to me goes, this is bull. Like, how quickly the world owes him something he knew existed only 10 seconds ago.
Right.
I thought this was a great video. It's C.K. Lewis, and I like to show it because sometimes people overestimate technology. Again, disruption's important, but it takes time to have that, and we should appreciate the technology that we have. So I'm going to give you a glimpse of some of the things that we see happening in the future for the meetings technology. So first, I have something called the event effect that at Cvent we talk a lot about. And basically the event effect is that we're moving to an experience economy. People are looking for experiences. And the fact is, with more technology, what you're having is that they're getting cluttered. So people want to move to an experience economy where they actually experience things and build personal collections and relationships. Because the fact is, you can't do that over WebEx or Go meetings or virtual meetings. And the fact that those are important things, and there's certainly an element, but nothing really replaces that experience that you get. So what is the things that you can do with technology to enhance that experience? So I'm going to walk you through kind of the old way things are being done, and not really the old way, but it's the current way. So first you get an invitation, an email about an event. You click on it, you decide to go to it or not, and you register online. Then you book your hotel and travel. If it's a good site, you can register, book your hotel, and your travel all in the same place. But the fact is, you're going to do it online very quickly. Then you're going to travel to the event, and then after finally getting to the event, it's 10 p.m., you got to wait in a hotel line to check in. Then the next morning, you're about to go to your registration desk to get your name tag, and then there's lines there also. And then you attend sessions, and you network, and so forth. And then finally, you return to the office and share the lessons with your colleagues, and you follow up with your connections. That's kind of the current way of doing business. And of course, that's better than fax. Of course, that's better than sending snail mail, and there's been a lot of improvements. But now there's a convergence that's changing a lot of what's happening in meetings. It's the convergence of the cloud, mobile, social, and big data, analytics. That combined with relationships is what we view as the future and part of the event effect. So let's embrace what the future is going to look like. the first thing that's going to happen in the future is when you have an event, instead of just getting an email, which will still happen, of course, for discovering events, you're now going to start going to events because of social media. Assume you went to a conference. You came to a conference like this, which was a fantastic and amazing conference, and people are talking about it. It's going to be pushed to you based on your preferences, and all of a sudden you're starting to get content based on what your friends and your colleagues are going to, or people you respect. So all of a sudden, finding events is going to be easier, and you're going to realize there's a much bigger world of meetings and events that may be more matched to what your interests are. And then what's going to happen is that you're going to, instead of signing on registration, you're going to sign on once. A profile is going to be built, and then anytime you register, it's going to be single sign-on, so you don't have to go through the process again. And then you're going to obviously register for your event, and then you're going to obviously be fully digitally checked in when you go to the airport. Right now, you have the QR code on your phone, and that's kind of neat. Most of us still aren't even necessarily using that. Forget the QR code. What's going to happen is that your phone, your iPhone, is basically an iBeacon. And when you walk past the gate, you don't need to show them that. It's going to automatically read that it's you, and you don't even have to show the phone. It's just going to go past it, and it's going to click. On-demand pickup. Everyone knows what's going on with Uber and other things. But it's much more challenging for an organizer. For an organizer, it's much more difficult when you have 25 different people flying in within an hour. Do you want to get them each a car? Of course not. You want to bring them all in central kind of cabs or buses. But the point is that people's flights are delayed, getting them all together to figure out where everyone is. It's really painful, and you need all these people on site. Soon, again, with your iPhone and the beacon, you're going to be able to know when they land, and you're going to be able to coordinate better to get more people clubbed together when you travel. Same thing when you check in a hotel. It's difficult to check in a hotel, but imagine if 25 of you are on a bus. You all got picked up from the airport, and then all 25 of you get there 10 p.m., and there's 1 or 2 desk clerks. It takes like 20, 30 minutes before they get to you. So again, full digital check-in, so you just walk right in, your keys on your mobile phone, and you already see a lot of hotels doing this. And then the next morning when you go to the event, again, because of your mobile phone, you're going to walk in because of iBeacons, and you're able to either register on an iPad, or you're just going to walk in and your badge will be printed. You don't need to wait in line. You don't need to talk to anyone because you're pre-registered. And then what's going to keep continuing to happen is that when you actually get to the event like this, you're going to have a mobile app. And it's going to be personalized. Of course, you signed up for your sessions and the things that you're interested in, but it's going to push you some things based on your profile that you filled out of people to meet, of sessions I should attend, especially if it's a large trade show with a lot of different sessions going on. And you're not going to change business cards eventually. Everything's going to be electronic, so you don't need to sit there and dig out your business cards. And then all of a sudden, the audience is going to get more engaged. You're starting to see a lot more engagement. You're seeing something that we call social wall at Cvent, which is basically putting all the feeds of social media, Twitter, Instagram, whatever, to show the engagement of the audience and show what the people are finding interesting. Maybe they're having a speaker, and people are saying, this is a great speaker. So people are going to move to that speaker, even though they're in another session, because it's such a great speech. But it's going to be shared content. Content is being shared by the audience. Mobile audience polling, I think, it's one of my favorite things. Instead of getting those clunky devices, you're going to do it on your mobile app. Much more engaging when a speaker can ask a question and the results come up on the screen, and it doesn't cost tons of money to be able to get people to do that. It's also a great way to find the demographics of your audience and find out who they are, so that when you speak, you can know more about your audience. Again, engaging your audience is more critical now, as opposed to what just the meeting planner's thinking. It's what does the audience want. On-demand keynote speeches. You hear a great speaker. What happens? It's not posted for 2 weeks. The passion's gone. You don't remember the speaker anymore. Wouldn't it be great that as soon as you leave a keynote presentation, that within 5 minutes you get a notification saying it's online right now, then you can push it because you still have that emotional attachment to the speech? That would be much better. So, and imagine if there's social media attached to that people are saying, boy, that was the best speech I've ever heard. All of a sudden, when you send that out to people, and 2 or 3 people say this is one of the best speeches ever, they're actually going to look at it and actually watch it because of, again, contextually, that people are commenting on it. And it's not 2 or 3 weeks later, and good luck digging up that speech. We all heard of Google Glass. I think it's going to be a reality in our market over time. It's certainly a few years away, probably 5 to 7 years when it's really starting to get used. But just to give you what's going to happen in the future, in our view, is all of a sudden with Google Glass, you're going to have context to everyone you see. And it's in particular with a trade show or an event, because over a 1-day period or a 2-day period, you're trying to download tons of information and decipher who do I talk to, what booth should I go to, what should I be doing at this event, because there's so much going on all at once. And so what you're going to start seeing is that you're not going to only be able to see where the exhibit booth that you want to visit is. That's kind of first order. But you're also going to get ratings based on your profile and things that you feed into it. They're going to say, this is probably a booth you want to visit based on the things you're looking for at this trade show. It's going to tell you what people. So imagine when you go to an event or a trade show, there's generally 5 or 6 people you really want to meet. But it's tough to meet them because they may not have set up an appointment with you before the meeting or the trade show. This is a way you can identify them. Post-event engagement. You're going to be able to have personalized event reports. Imagine all the notes you took, the speeches you see, all the different feeds you saw that you found a few of them interesting. You can save them all in one place and look at it later. But more importantly, the event will continue to live on 6 months later because it's all going to be in the mobile app, a central repository where you can go back to. If you go to an event and they have 10 or 15 speakers and sessions, it's very difficult to get that content later on, much less 6 months later. So again, the event will live longer. They're looking for an experience that goes beyond just the 2 or 3 days or one day that they're at the event. So basically, what we think is that what's going to happen is technology is not going to replace events. I remember when we were on Wall Street and we were going public last year, all of Wall Street thought that meetings was going to go down. They were skeptical when we were going public. And what we told them is, despite virtual meetings, despite WebEx, despite Skype, the fact is people are getting inundated with technology. And the fact is that we think with technology, we can make live events much more effective. An example of that is through hybrid events like what we're doing here. You might have 1,500 or 2,000 people attending this, but several thousand more will see the webcasting of an event. So you can do live events with webcasting, but the fact is, by taking technology, by blending it with your personal experience, you can enhance that experience to have a higher ROI. I thought this was the last couple slides, and then I'll take some questions. These are the most stressful jobs that are around the world. And the interesting thing is, meeting planning is the only one, or event planning is the only one that's not life-threatening. Some event planners would argue with that. But lots at stake at a big event. The last couple things I'll say is, I talked about the attendee experience. Let me talk about the organization. From the organization view, with technology, what you're going to see is that they're going to be able to increase their attendance. They're going to be able to decrease their cost by using technology to make things more efficient so they can focus on strategy and strategic things like the attendee experience, like getting a higher ROI. Disruption, that will happen with technology, but it takes time. But with the convergence of mobile, social, big data, and analytics, things are really changing rapidly, in particular because your audience all have smartphones. They're travelers, they're event attendees, and with that, you're going to see a massive change happen. So everyone really needs to adapt mobile technology and social, because that is the future. And the fact is, last month was the first time in the history of the world where there are more smartphones than people on the planet. Technology is ever changing, but meetings are here to stay. And the reason why is simple. Nothing's better than meeting face-to-face, looking someone in the eye, shaking their hand, and breaking bread. That will always build a stronger relationship than anything. But let's leverage technology to do that. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take some questions.
Hi, Reggie. My name's William Thompson. Firstly, thank you very much for that presentation. Absolutely fantastic. I think there's a lot of people in the audience who will share the journey of technology, and we can see where technology is going to take us as organisers, our events, and our attendees. But in the last month, I've done 3 bits of event consultancy. One with an international organisation who are huge. The second one with a medium-sized charity. And the third one with a small company who run a couple of events. Which one of those 3 companies do you think used an event management platform?
You got to ask the last part.
Which one of those 3 companies used an event management platform?
Okay, you said a charity?
Yeah, a huge multi-international events company and a small company.
So the question is, there are 3 different organizations that he named. A multinational company, a charity, and what was the third one?
Just a small event
company. A small company. Which one uses an event management platform?
The answer is none of them.
Okay, so maybe that is right now.
Yeah, and I think this is the fundamental aspect when we're looking at event technology. We can paint these pictures of the future being hugely involved and experiential, but we have to say something to organisers to get them on that train and to start them using event technology. And I wonder what would be your one tip to start organisers using technology? Because painting the picture like this is all very interesting, but how do we get them?
What's the practical?
How do we get them on that first hurdle?
So the question is, there's 3 different types of organizations. None of them are using an event management platform. How do you start them off on something simple? So the fact is, with a good platform, you don't need to have all of this. You can start with something basic like online event registration or maybe just a mobile app. So the fact is, with any platform that's good, the product should be integrated, but also what it means is you can use any parts that are your biggest pain point right now to start off. Here's what I'll tell you. You know, we have about 135,000 users of our technology. We've trained all kinds of people. And a lot of the companies here have done the same thing. A lot of it is just finding people who are willing to learn something different, because the fact is it will improve. They may not like that particular technology, but the fact is that they'll use some technology because it'll make it better for the experience for the attendee, for the organizer, and the person. So the bottom line is that there's things that you can use that are simple to start off with or more complicated like the whole platform. My recommendation is to start off with one part, a module, get comfortable with that, and expand as you do it. Don't just go in there and get the whole platform day one, because it is overwhelming. But the fact is, it is the future. It's inevitable. And the fact is, it'll make their job better and everyone else around them better. So all I can do is say that they can take baby steps, and in just a few hours, they could be up and running. So a lot of times, it's just a psychological excuse, in my view, because there's all kinds of technology that you can learn and use very simply. Okay? Other questions?
Hi, Reggie. It's Samuel from OpenStage. I was just wondering, what do you see the future of location-based technology and how that's going to affect the events industry?
So the question is, what about location-based technology? So it's just starting to come out, especially in particular with Apple getting behind the iBeacon. You're going to start seeing a much more adoption of it. The problem with it right now is the technology is a lot of times when you go buy it, you have to go up there and actually scan right there at the badge, for example. But over time, they'll get improved. I don't know how they have it in the UK, but in the US, we have something called Easy Pass. So when I drive on a certain highway, I don't have to slow down anymore. I can go 65 miles an hour, and it reads that I've paid my toll. So that same type of technology will be in an event, because you're not walking 65 miles an hour. So it should be able to read. But basically, it'll improve, first of all, the technology, be able to read stuff. Number 2, there'll be all kinds of creative ways to use it. Not just scanning in people, but obviously when they go to sessions, you're going to start building heat maps, so you're going to see where people are going. And you can start seeing where the interest lies, what kind of speakers, what kind of part of the trade show. So I think it's going to give you more data, and with that data, you can make a more optimal event for your attendees. I think it also creates a lot of efficiency because you reduce the manpower that you need to do certain things. But it's just the beginning, and there'll be all kinds of creative things that get created. But it is something that's going to evolve, and it's here to stay, because you're getting a lot of people going to an event. And think of, let's say, a consumer event like a festival. There's so much going on, so much transaction, that you need to do something that can do stuff in the mass. If you have a small event, you know, that technology is not as important. But the fact is, it is something that's going to evolve, and it's here to stay because it can really help a planner in a lot of ways. Other questions? Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what's the biggest challenge Cvent has faced since going public?
The question is, what's the biggest challenge we faced since going public? So we went public in August of 2013. And for me personally, I think the biggest challenge is transparency. We were very transparent with our company the whole way. Back in 2001, we would tell them how much money we had in the bank, what was our revenue, what was our losses. And that culture was our culture all the way to 2013. We would always tell everyone what's in our bank, what's our profits, what's our losses. We would talk openly about our challenges. And I think that let people feel more comfortable with the company and be part of it. The problem is when you go public, you can't share that information anymore, only with the limited people, because then you're giving them information they can trade the stock, even your own employees. So I would say transparency is number 1. The second thing is that as a CEO of a public company, I do spend a lot of time doing things on Wall Street. So I spend about 30% of my time or 25% of my time instead of with recruiting great people, building great products, or servicing customers. That's on a personal level probably the biggest challenge for me to balance that. But the fact is, we think it was the right thing to go public because it has given us a lot of funding and it's given us a bigger global brand. So I think it ended up much more outweighing the pros, much more outweighed the cons. But there is some challenges to being public. Yes. Oh, back there.
Last one.
Okay, no worries.
Hi, Reggie, Mark, and thanks for the great speech. So my background is in hospitality, and I wanted to ask you, how do you think, how long it will take for the hospitality industry, especially in Europe, to embrace ERFP channels and ERFP tools? Because at the moment, I think the percentage is ridiculously low, and it takes a lot of time for us to understand and see the value and the benefits of these channels. So what do you think, how it will, look in the future?
So the question is, ERFP technology, how long will it take the European market or the UK market to embrace ERFPs or technology in general? So I'm going to give you a very straightforward answer. I'm in utter shock at how people in the UK do business with hotels and planners. Everything's by the phone, the vast majority. And it's kind of difficult to understand that with technology. But that's the culture, and it's worked. So again, like with anything, it takes time to change culture, behavior, and something that's worked. But the fact is that as more and more people adopt it, they'll see that it's more efficient for them, it's more efficient for their organization, it's more efficient for the hotel. So I think basically what it is education. They need to see successes. And what's going to happen, frankly, is that as a lot of the major chains are based out of the U.S., they're seeing massive success in terms of ERFPs versus manual processes. That change will come, frankly, from the bigger chains driving it. It'll come from the change that people see, that meeting planners and event organizations are saying, hey, I don't want to pick up the phone and make phone calls every time when I can just send out an ERFP in 2 or 3 minutes, and then I can pick up the phone and still talk to you. Again, technology only empowers the relationship. It doesn't replace it. It's kind of like you used to send a fax, or you used to send a snail mail, then a fax, then a PDF file. Now you're just what we call, you just Cvent it. You're just sending an electronic RFP, but you can still pick up the phone and talk, but all the information's there. So I think it's going to take time. I think best practices will always get adopted. They will always get adopted. It just takes time. Think of the mobile phone. Look how long it took before some people got it. Online registration. I remember when we were pushing it and we were starting to talk about it in 1999, people were like, I don't need online registration. I've done fax. And now we think that's crazy if someone faxed a registration. It took 7 years to go from kind of fax to online registration. It took 7 years to go from snail mail to email. It'll take some time, but it will happen. It's inevitable because it's more efficient and it's more optimal for the process for everyone, including the hotels and the planners. Sure. So, David?
Hey, Reggie, just a quick question that's come through from the Glisser app. You mentioned in terms of growing your company, you should start in your domestic market and get good and be the best there. What do you advise for European companies who have a very small domestic market? Should they go global more quickly than you had the benefit of doing from a huge market in the US?
Sure. The question is, the US is a big market, so you can be domestic only for a while. The UK is a smaller market, or the European market's smaller, and so how do you build in a smaller market before you go into a bigger market? So here's what I'll tell you. And again, very, very direct and honest answer. It is any European company that's able to scale, I have a lot of respect for, because there's so many challenges, because you have to deal with so many different countries within Europe. And if you can scale there, then to me, you've built an amazing business simply because you've gone through even more challenges. In the U.S., we have a very large market. So you can just stay in the U.S. and your product can be focused on that, and then you can scale when you're much larger. So the only thing I would tell people is if I was a company based in the UK, the first thing I would do is focus on the UK. Everyone's always saying, hey, it's very sexy. Why aren't we in Paris? Why aren't we, all around the world? What I tell people is, it's just as sexy to be in any town in the UK. Master the UK. Become the #1 player in your space in the UK. Then spread. Because the reality is if you can't build a strong foundation, a strong base, as you go international, as you go into other countries, it is more difficult because your company wasn't born and bred there. And it's always more difficult to build a business, outside of your home base. It just is. Now, that happens as you get bigger and you're a multinational company and you adopt different cultures and norms, but that takes time. So my recommendation is focus on this local market, and local meaning it's a big market still. There's 65 million people in the UK, and there's a lot of transformation going on here in the meeting space, and that's enough to grow a nice business. And then as you get to be more mature, then you expand. And that's what I would personally do and what I've learned. But every company has different products, and they have a different view of what they need to do to go global. But just focus on a market or a smaller market, become the best, then expand. That's my biggest advice. With that, again, thank you very much. I Want to also give a word of inspiration for the innovators and the entrepreneurs here. Just hang in there, be patient, and again, persistency is the big thing you need to do. But thank you very much for listening to me.